back to this series of videos dedicated to Orlando Furioso. Today we're going to read together Canto 2. And before I start, I wanted to show you the Italian edition of the Orlando Furioso that I'm reading, which comes with outstanding introduction by Italo Calvino. So as part of these videos, of this series of videos, I'm going to, since the introduction by Calvino is about 22 pages, I haven't found it translated in English anywhere. So I'm going to translate it in English for you guys, and a little part, or a little piece for every video. I think it's going to be interesting to hear what Calvino, not only is a great character, a great person in the Italian literature history, but also somebody who was really in love with Orlando Furioso, has to say about it. Calvino starts with a little bit of a historic context, historic introduction, and in particular he focuses on Charlemagne. He says, if you have studied Charlemagne like me when you were at school, you remember this purple cloud that was covering all of Europe, all of Eastern Europe, until the Danube River, etc. But on the west side, this purple cloud only stopped at Spain, because Spain was still in the hands of the Saracens. So Calvino says, in relation to the Orlando Furioso, we have to remember that among all the wars and battles that Charlemagne fought and won, they were the ones against the Bavars, the Frisians, the Slavs, Avars, Bretons, and the wars against the Arabs are only, in his history, only a relatively small portion of what Charlemagne actually did in terms of fighting. But in literature, they became huge, and they really ended up becoming something that is so gigantic that covered the entire planet. Then Calvino continues. In 778, Charlemagne tried an expedition to win Saragossa in Spain. However, he was forced to go back through the Pyrenees again. And while he was retreating, the back of his army was attacked by the Basques from the mountains and completely destroyed near a place called Roncesvalles. So this defeat is in fact part of history, and the official chronicles of that time talk about, among all the different Franks that were killed in that battle, a certain Rolandu, and obviously he is the historic figure of Roland or Orlando. But Calvino says the history stops here. We don't know anything much more about this historic character, because the Chanson de Roland was written about 3 centuries after the Roncesvalles battle. So it's much more important, let's say, what happened in literature, in the history of imagination, rather than what actually happened in the history of Charlemagne, in the actual history. The second canto of Orlando Furioso is very plain in terms of understanding. In fact, I think it flows a little bit better than the first canto, and so it's very easy to understand in terms of the plot. I'd like to make a quick comment about the Italian language, because I talked about the metric in the first video, but I haven't really addressed the point of what kind of Italian Ludovico Ariosto used. And it's interesting because in the first version of Orlando Furioso, Ariosto used an Italian that was still very contaminated by local forms of expression. They were from Emilia, his region, and also from Lombardia. And it was a period of time, the Renaissance, where he lived, where there was a very intense debate about language. Pietro Bembo was one of the Italian intellectuals who were, let's say, one of the lights of this dialogue, of this debate. And he said that the really pure Italian, or the direction that authors should take and poets should take to write for everybody in Italy, was that of the Tuscan. The Tuscan, let's say, that everybody who was really educated was speaking, the Tuscan of Dante, Petrarca, and Boccaccio. So Ariosto, in a very clever way, understood that and applied it to his poem. So from the first version, he cleaned up all those local Emilian and Lombardy expressions, and also he cleaned it up from some Latinisms that he had used, and shifted more towards the Tuscan type of language. And in fact, this move in his revision was a crucial part and a crucial reason of the tremendous success that Orlando Furioso actually had. The result is a language that myself, as a modern Italian, can understand fairly well. To give you an idea, I can certainly understand Orlando Furioso much better than when I'm reading, if I was to read Dante for the first time, because Dante's Italian is a little bit more difficult to understand for modern Italians. But I understand Orlando Furioso a little bit less than Italo Calvino's Italian, because it's from the 20th century. So it's placed in between that area. But let's start reading the second canto. As with every canto, Ariosto reserves the first verses for a little bit of a mini proemio, a general comment that he has to make about the events and about the world and human existence. So here in Italian, he starts very strongly with this adjective, which is ingiustissimo amor. Ingiustissimo means not only love, you are unjust, but you are more than unjust. You're very, very unjust. Ingiustissimo amor. And then he goes on to explain this backstory coming still from Boiardo's Orlando Innamorato, where we have to be reminded that this incredible relationship between Rinaldo and Angelica, which is in this moment of the narration, Angelica is in fact hating Rinaldo and Rinaldo loves Angelica. It was completely inverted in Orlando Innamorato due to a magic fountain. And this magic fountain produced the effect, depending on where you drink from, produced the effect of making somebody hate somebody else or love somebody else. And that's what happened. They come back to the fountain and this switch happens. So as I said, I'm going to only highlight a few passages because the narration, I think, flows very well and is very plain. But there is one stanza that I really, really love, especially the sound of it. So I'm going to read it for you. This is stanza number 5. Come soglion talor duo can mordenti, o per invidia o per altro odio mossi. Listen to all these R sounds that Ariosto chooses. Avvicinarsi digrignando I denti, con occhi bieci e più che braccia rossi, indi a morsi venir di rabbia ardenti, con aspri ringhi e ribuffati dossi, così alle spade, etc., etc. There is a real craft here of somebody who knows that the poem is going to be recited out loud and is going to produce a sound. It's a canto, it's a kind of singing. Another great example of the use of language here is at stanza number 9, where Ariosto is still describing the duel between Rinaldo and Sacripante, and it sounds like this. Fanno or con lunghi, ora con finti e scarsi, colpi veder che mastri son del gioco. Or li vedi ire altieri, or rannicchiarsi, ora coprirsi, ora mostrarsi un poco, ora crescere innanzi, ora means now. Now they do this, now they do that. Now it's extremely dynamic as a scene. It's really masterful. But Ariosto moves his narration very fast, and we are in fact already at stanza 16, where we are in front of a scene where Angelica has run away. She's found a sort of a wizard, and this wizard has conjured a spirit. This spirit is now pretending to be a man, something of a messenger, who puts himself between Rinaldo and Sacripante. And he tells them a lie, a flat-out lie. They fully believe him, and the funny thing about this is that we are now told by Ariosto that even Boiardo, Rinaldo's horse, has a human intelligence, and he understands everything, even more in fact, than the humans. And he's also been tricked by this spirit because he believes what the spirit has said. I find it really clever at stanza 20, where Ariosto stops the narration all of a sudden and talks directly to Ippolito, to his sir, to his signor. He says, Signor, non voglio che vi paia strano. I don't want it to look strange or weird if Rinaldo now has it so easy to jump on his horse, because he's been trying to jump on his horse and get his horse until now, but he hasn't been able. So I'm going to explain. And I find it clever because you understand that Ariosto had this plot in mind since the beginning of Canto 1. The strange behavior of Bayardo, of the horse, was all for a specific purpose. He loves his master, who's Rinaldo, and he wanted to help his master. So in a very short amount of stanzas, we have Rinaldo running away, running towards Paris, meeting with Charlemagne, and getting the orders from Charlemagne to go to England and find somebody, some kind of reinforcement, some kind of additional combatants or fighters who can help them in their battle. Rinaldo could not be unhappier about this order, but he complies. And so we see him going to Calais, which is the French port for England, getting to a ship, and at a certain point Rinaldo is on this ship which is moved back and forth by the storm, and Ariosto intervenes again, saying, "Ma perché varie fila e varie tele?" I love this entrelacement. He's actually literally talking about the different ropes and the different lines that he's intertwining. "Uopo mi son, che tutte ordire intendo, lascio Rinaldo e l'agitata prua e torno a dir di Bradamante sua." So from here we can call it the second part of the canto, where we focus on Bradamante. We remember Bradamante, she's one of the two progenitors, legendary progenitors of the Este family, Bradamante and Ruggero. They already met in Orlando Innamorato, and as soon as they showed themselves their faces, they fell in love, but the events didn't let them get together. They didn't have time to really meet and know each other, but they know each other and they love each other already. And so we see her riding after having defeated Sacripante. "Traversò un bosco e dopo il bosco un monte, tanto che giunse ad una bella fonte." Bradamante arrives to some kind of little source of water, maybe it's a little lake or a little creek, and she gets some rest, and she immediately sees a very sad, very pensive knight over there in the field. We don't know this at this point, but this knight is a certain Pinabel, who is part of a family that in the entire poem are, in a sense, the bad guys of the poem, because it's a family of people who are dishonest, unjust, cruel, and they keep betraying everybody. But at this point, she doesn't know who he is, and he doesn't know who she is. So she asks what's wrong, and he tells this incredible story, which is particularly interesting because for the poem, because at the end of stanza 37, we get, for the very first time, a glimpse of our main hero, of Orlando, Roland, where Pinabel, this knight, says, "E una giovane bella meco avea, del cui fervido amor nel petto avampo, e ritrovai presso Rodonna armato, uncre frenava un gran destriero alato." Pinabel describes how his woman was in fact snatched from the sky by this crazy and lusty knight, picked her up, and he only heard her screams. Pinabel didn't even realize that she was being abducted. And so he tried to follow wherever this flying horse was going. He arrives to a place that is going to be very important for the poem. That's called the Castle of Atlas. And this castle is made all in metal, in a metal like iron or maybe even stronger. So it's shining in the middle of a valley. And he continues the narration talking about two other knights, one of whom is Ruggero. In fact, at this point, of course, Bradamante is very attentive to the story. Ruggero and Gradasso, and they were going to the castle for a challenge with Orlando. They arrive to the castle, and here we have one of the funniest and most fantastic scenes so far, at least. I'm reading from the end of stanza 48 and the beginning of stanza 49. "Ecco apparire il cavaliero armato, fuor della porta e sul cavallo alato. Cominciò a poco indi a levarse, come suol far la peregrina grue, che corre prima e poi vediamo alzarse, alla terra vicina un braccio o due. So not only these two poor knights, including Ruggiero, are destroyed, he keeps attacking them from left and right from the sky and then taking off again, but at a certain point he also takes off the silk cloth from his shield, which is apparently a magic shield because it's so bright that its light can blind you and make you lose your senses. This is described in stanza 55, where Ariosto says: d'un bel drappo di seta avea coperto, lo scudo in braccio il cavalier celeste, ch'immantinente che lo mostra aperto, forza è che il mira abbarbagliato reste, e cada come corpo morto cade. I wanted to get to this line because this is literally a line taken from Dante, from Inferno, Canto 5, where Dante falls on the ground and his endecasyllable is copied and pasted by Ariosto here. Cade come corpo morto cade. This magic shield is shining of a bright red light. I'm not sure what your translation says, but the word that Ariosto uses is piropo, which is a very uncommon word. I didn't know what this means, but it's a precious stone that is found also in Petrarca and other poets, and that had a particularly bright and shiny red color. After hearing all this incredible story, Bradamante is convinced to go together with this knight and save Ruggiero, not only Ruggiero but also his woman, the knight's woman, together. Ariosto breaks through again and he explains to us who this knight was. He was Pinabel, the Count Pinabel, who's a very evil guy. So we, the readers, at this point are informed and warned by Ariosto about his nature. It's also, I think, remarkable for the nature of the poem to see what happens when this other messenger arrives and brings to Bradamante the news that she is needed. She is being recalled by Charlemagne. She's being recalled for the battle, for her duties. And she has a moment of hesitation, but I'm reading from stanza number 65. Tra sì e no la giovane sospesa, di voler ritornare dubita un poco. Quinci l'onore e il debito le pesa, quindi l'incalza l'amoroso foco. Between the fire of love and the honor and the debt of loyalty, in the end she chooses the fire of love, which is something that in a previous, more ancient and more serious, let's say, knightly epic would never have happened. But in Orlando Furioso, this constantly happens, including the female knights. The messenger, however, has revealed Bradamante's identity to the Count Pinabel. So at this point, he knows that he hates her and he hates all of her family. So he's plotting, and we know how the canto ends with this terrible betrayal, and she ends up in the bottom of a cave. And this is the cliffhanger with which Canto Second ends. I found this one probably even more powerful than Canto 1 in terms of how much it drew me in as a reader, and I cannot wait to see what happens to Bradamante in Canto 3. So thank you all for watching, for listening, and we'll speak again very soon with Canto 3.